My name is Poppy Kovac. This is my English 4U culminating task. Joining me today is Nuala O'Connell to speak on refugees, migrants, and immigrants, the language of a humanitarian crisis. We'll be answering questions concerning how media uses harmful and biased language with respect to migrants and refugees. To start the podcast, we'll introduce a video that we watched on Fox News where video commenter Greg Gutfeld did a comedic news segment implying that refugees were lying about the conditions which they were escaping from. Let's discuss our thoughts on this.
I think that with any of these videos, you have to, it's obvious enough that Greg Gutfeld is a conservative or Republican because he's working for Fox News. But it's also really obvious because he says at one point, he's like, I'm all for immigrants. And that's all what Republicans say because they're fine with immigrants because immigration is a much less... refugees come from, a lot of Middle Eastern countries, a lot of African countries, because there's a lot of political corruption and a lot of turmoil there. And immigrants come from all over. They come from European countries. They come from, technically, wealthier and more, and whiter countries. And so obviously, right from the get-go, this guy is systemically racist ideologies. And I think that he makes this point to antagonize refugees in general, and especially the refugee men, when he makes a comment, men coming first is like the Titanic in reverse. When, that's such a stupid thing because, from the time that people have been immigrating here, it's traditionally how people move because it's based on traditional roots. The men come, get a job, and then the women look after families. Many of these cultures who are immigrating here are still based in those traditional, less modernized roots. So,
and to add to that, he also, with the same sentence, mentioning that he's all for refugees, he later mentions that he is all for them under certain limitations on what they do for the country. And that kind of plays into the concept that immigration is good for the economy, and maybe that's why he agrees with immigration, not because he cares about the quality of life for these people, but more so how they affect our economy. And he continues to throw bashes as to how they're living, such as how they're staying in a hotel, which is known to be a little bit nicer, and that they're wearing nicer clothes than most American citizens, which feeds into the idea that refugees and immigrants can't live a successful life once they immigrate, and they can't live the life that they came here to try and create for themselves. And it creates this bias that refugees are just temporary and that they aren't supposed to be full American citizens.
And I think it also just perpetuates the idea that refugees themselves are undignified when he's talking about, what they're sleeping on the bed that our military men sleep on and all that.
They compare them constantly to American citizens to degrade the concept that they could eventually live a life that's similar.
It's also just being they should be thankful for just having a bed or having some form of food when they're living in horrible, these refugee houses, these refugee camps. They're horrible conditions. They're not well funded by the government, and they're not conditions that any American would if Americans were living in these conditions, then other Americans would step up and defend them, and they don't do that for refugees because they're they should be thankful for what they have. We're saving it.
It also is extremely harmful because America has this whole symbolism around the American dream and how to achieve it, and obviously that appeals to many refugee and immigrant families who are fleeing from war-torn countries and places of corruption. And then when they arrive here, to be told that they can't achieve that American dream because of their roots and because of their heritage and their status in America, it's so damaging to the whole idea that you're supposed to achieve freedom when you reach America, yet the moment that there is step towards freedom and towards living a successful life, there are harsh rumors and ideas created around that as to how they were achieving that and how they are bribing and lying in order to achieve this higher lifestyle instead of working hard and creating that American dream based off the fundamentals of America.
Yeah, and I also just think that America definitely lets on a fake kind of idealistic version of themselves, whereas like, you know, kids who are like 13, 14 in like many Middle Eastern countries, many African countries, and where they're not really connected to any sort of Western news or Western media, it makes it extremely hard for them to see the reality of America. And so when they study America in school, in many of these countries, America's let on kind of the country full of freedom and full of equality. And then it's such a like it's the absolute opposite of that. And so these kids move with their families to America, and then they're kind of hit with reality, like minority groups, so they're not going to be treated equally, they're not going to be treated with dignity, they're going to kind of like be told time and time again, like, this is your position in society and you're not going to move anywhere on the ladder.
In addition to the video, there are also many other harmful Fox News headlines, and I wanted to dive deeper into how those headlines are affecting refugee and immigrant populations.
And the headline I want to talk about is titled, "The Whole Refugee Crisis is a Lie."
I mean, that's actually the stupidest thing. How can you say that the whole refugee crisis is a lie? Refugees have been seeking refuge in other countries, in North America a lot, in Europe a lot, for hundreds of years. There's disasters happening that are certainly not a lie. I mean, there's going to be people fleeing those disasters.
It's interesting because when you watch the video, it definitely, although it's still ridiculous, it dives deeper into the concept that there is a story that follows with this headline. The fact that that is what they choose to title this news segment is ridiculous, because it obviously grasps your attention. You see the whole refugee crisis was a lie, and then you find out it is a story about...
I mean, it's so dangerous. There's gonna be people who are paying high taxes for a multitude of reasons, and they're gonna see that, be like, this is a reason that I'm in debt, this is a reason I'm paying so many taxes, and then they're gonna take it out on refugees and just act on these hateful motives, and that is the problem with this type of news.
And I want to bring up another quote when Phil mentioned the welcoming of countries. He said, "We say to male migrants, welcome to our country, and then they turn around and say to incoming migrant families, go back to where you came from." So it happens that illegal immigrants are also vehemently against illegal immigration. The moment they get here, they turn from helpless refugees into Ann Cutler. I'm surprised they didn't start chanting, build a wall, build a wall. My goodness, this is amazing. And that makes me ask the question of, why does the media continue to question the reasons of immigrants and refugees? And why does the media continue to create suspicion around immigrants?
I mean, I think just to begin, that whole quote is like inherently wrong, because it's not that the immigrants or the refugees don't want more refugees. It's that the government is not putting enough money into where they live once they seek refuge here, that they need to live, and so you get into this position where you're going to put yourself and your family's needs above other refugees, even though you want them to be okay. It's not that they're against each other, but they're against the system in general. And I think that the media continues to treat or to question the motives of refugees, because they like, well, I would say the right-wing media, more so, I feel, continues to antagonize refugees and question their motives, because they don't want to admit that the large problem is the Republican Party and their laws and legislation. And you know, the Democrats also do have some laws and legislations, but they are not openly like build a wall and like extreme in that sense. So I just feel like the media doesn't want to admit that their Republican politicians are wrong, so they're going to find another way, blaming it on the people who they don't like in the first place.
And so I think the other way that they're doing that is also turning refugees and immigrants against each other, in the sense that they're speaking for them here, saying that illegal immigrants are against illegal immigration, and that they are turning helpless refugees away from opportunities of safety and refuge. I think that is so harmful, because it creates this divide between immigrants and refugees, and it's posted through the media and shows to society that we have to pick who we're going to support, as if they're kind of weaponizing the two. You can't support refugees and you can't support immigrants in the eyes of the media. You have to pick, because they just have turned them completely against each other. I'm surprised they didn't start chanting, build a wall, build a wall, build a wall. It makes people think that when a marginalized group of people is against their own decisions, that we should be against it too.
I think it's like the same thing with all other marginalized groups as well. I mean, the debate within the community as well, like that, like fixes any, like that makes it more okay for them to share their opinion. And so I think that is definitely the tactic that these media outlets are using, is weaponizing the two groups against each other, because then, you know, they can question it as well because it's not as unified topic in their eyes.
I also think the story itself is really interesting because it makes me wonder, how are refugees being selected amongst society? There's so many cases of war-torn countries and countries in corruption where large populations are migrating to America and Canada and northern countries. And, for example, the stories on the war on the Ukraine.
Well, I think because part of Putin's propaganda is saying that Russians are being displaced and, you know, like their livelihoods are threatened by, like, Ukraine. And so media outlets aren't going to want to show Russian refugees, even though these people are innocent, you know, in nature. They're not going to want to show them because they don't want that to play into the propaganda. Also, there's another article on Fox News about Ukrainian refugees and how it was titled something like, Ukrainian refugees are like making it clear that all people can be refugees. And I thought that was so stupid, because it's I mean, they're saying that because Ukrainians are primarily white, and it's like, we've never had this whole influx of white refugees, which, you know, we have, like in the Holocaust we did have that, but I mean, like, it's making it clear that like everyone can call themselves a refugee. It's this really weird kind of article, and it's just very, like, I also find that, I mean, people's attitudes towards Ukrainian refugees are much different than the attitudes towards, you know, Syrian refugees.
I also think that the media has had a really big conscious impact of brutalizing Russia. I feel like in order, like, it goes back to my point about making people in society feel like they need to choose between immigrants and refugees. It's the same thing choosing between Russian and Ukrainian refugees, when in reality, refugees are refugees.
They're like a victim of their own government.
Exactly. And although, like, the experiences of Ukrainian and Russian refugees can't be compared, there's so many different extensions of each. Russian refugees have really impacted them in reality, because still are both fleeing from war-torn countries. And, like, the harmful stigmas concerning Russian refugees have really impacted them in reality, because the Russian refugees who are fleeing the border to seek safety are being attacked. They're being attacked by the media. That's what it is. The refugees that are going to the border to flee their country or to protest are being attacked by the media for making that decision.
Yeah, which is stupid, because I mean, they're all
coming from war.
They're all losing their home and their country and that kind of nationalistic factor. You're losing that when you seek refuge in another country, and they're both losing it. And I mean, it's different because Russians are kind of being targeted. They're victims of their own government.
If the media has the ability to create this divide between Ukrainian and Russian refugees, why are they not choosing to also aid the Russian refugees? Why is it so hard to find on the media these stories about Russian refugees?
I feel like the media should make it more clear what Putin's doing and what Zelensky's doing and what the Ukrainian and Russian armed forces are doing. The refugees and the innocent families, they are one group in itself and in themselves, and they should not be grouped in with their government or who their government is. And I think that is how the media should portray it.
All right, that looks like it's it for today. Thank you for joining us on our podcast. We hope that you take from this that not everything you hear online is true, and that the media is not a reliable source in concern to refugees, migrants, and immigrants, and that the language of the humanitarian crisis is heavily influenced by the media, which come from tons of personal bias and personal feelings. And
yeah, good talking.
We'll be back again for another English for You culminating test.